President Trump made more than $21 million in highly unusual payments in 2016, according to a report on his tax records in the New York Times. That money flowing from several of Trump's businesses to Trump himself. Meanwhile, the Manhattan DA's subpoena for President Trump's tax records looks like it's heading back to the Supreme Court. But what is the Manhattan DA looking for there? And are there criminal implications? NBC News correspondent for investigations Tom Winter explains.
Manhattan District Attorney is using a grand jury and confidential informants to continue their investigation into the Trump Organization and the president himself over, you guessed it, his taxes. The New York Times reported that the president has paid as little as $750 in personal federal income tax in 2016 and 2017. But there are other revelations about the president's taxes that could ultimately land him in legal hot water. The president continues to fight the handing over of his tax returns and tax documents to prosecutors for the Manhattan DA, Cy Vance. So what could prosecutors be looking for in those long sought-after documents? Legal and law enforcement experts expect investigators will look to see what Trump and the Trump Organization declared on their local, state, and federal tax returns as income, as losses, as well as other financial information. They will compare that to what Trump has presented to banks and insurance companies for income, losses, asset valuations, and other financial information. Once they're done looking at those documents with a magnifying glass, will they discover any differences? And if there are differences, then are there arrests? What are the potential crimes that the DA is looking at into the Trump Organization and to Trump himself? According to court documents, prosecutors are looking at the following violations of criminal code: scheme to defraud, falsification of business records, insurance fraud, and criminal tax fraud. Court documents show Trump properties coast to coast are being looked at as well, scrutiny that includes the New York Attorney General's office. Separate court documents show the DA's investigators are also taking a look at possible violations tied to those so-called hush money payments made to two women in 2016, Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. Separately, there are non-criminal areas of scrutiny that may get the attention of the IRS. For example, there's payments to Ivanka Trump as a consultant while she is one of the principals of the Trump Organization. Will investigators determine if that was an effort by the Trump family to dodge taxes? And finally, what about big losses the Times says the president has used to carry over each year to post against his income? He gave up a partnership and has now shuttered Atlantic City casinos, resulting in a big loss on paper. But was that proper? And if the IRS finds it is improper, could there be a nearly $100 million bill that could come due in cash? NBC News has not independently reviewed the tax documents in the New York Times, and the president and his attorneys have steadfastly denied any wrongdoing. Alan Garten with the Trump Organization says the New York Times' story is riddled with gross inaccuracies. Over the past decade, the president has paid tens of millions of dollars in personal taxes to the federal government. What is not known is how long any of these investigations will take and if there will be any charges. That's assuming that Vance ends up getting Trump's tax documents. Any of those tax documents wouldn't become public until and if there was a trial. Nearly 4 years into Trump's presidency, we still don't have his full financial picture, but we're starting to get a clearer picture about what investigators are looking for.
He's calling it the lingering thing. President Trump answering concerns about his health today, specifically that he had to pause and clear his throat at least twice in an interview with Fox's Sean Hannity last night. Here's what the president told Rush Limbaugh about his voice today.
You sound great. I've been reading that you got a hacking cough and that your voice is hoarse and you sound perfectly normal to me.
Well, there's always that little, that little lingering thing for a couple of days. But no, my voice is now perfect. I mean, for a couple of days, it's called the lingering thing. If you have hay fever, if you have something, you have that too, a little bit. But no, this is the most amazing thing that's happened.
NBCNews.com senior White House reporter Shannon Pettypiece joining me now from Washington, D.C. Shannon, the president said he feels perfect in that interview with Rush Limbaugh. What concerns are you hearing about the president's health from inside the White House or elsewhere today?
Well, I mean, there was this idea that, maybe he was experiencing a little bit more of a cough or congestion or respiratory after this Sean Hannity interview last night, where there was like some pretty significant moments where he stopped to have to clear his voice. He was just on with Rush Limbaugh for about 2 hours without coughing or clearing his voice at all. So on that front, I think that alleviated that concern. He has a Fox News interview tonight where he is supposed to have a medical evaluation with a TV doctor. We'll see how that goes. But the real piece of information everyone wants is some actual data and test results from the president's physician. So does he test negative for the coronavirus? Does he have that viral load where that would be detected on a test? A little bit of background on when his last negative test was, which is something the White House continues to refuse to answer. And then doctors also have a lot of questions about his lung scans, that type of information. We've only been getting these, brief paragraph descriptions from his doctor so far. It was told to us today that we may be getting some more information, so we'll continue to look for that. But I think the next big one is, does he get a negative coronavirus test, which would be an indication that he's probably not shedding the virus anymore.
Yeah, Shannon, speaking about that test, the president said he will probably be tested for COVID today. Any updates there about if and when that might be happening from the White House?
No, we don't. And, we've been getting these reports from the White House actually rather late. They have been coming, but late in the day. So we may still get something about that today. My colleague, Callie Jackson, she pressed a White House spokesperson on this quite a bit earlier today. Have a listen.
When was the president's last negative test prior to his diagnosis?
So we don't have that, but we're looking at this from a public health perspective in that when there's an indication of a positive test or symptoms showing, then you go back the 48 hours, you do your contact tracing.
So on that last negative test, you said you don't have that. You don't know, or you don't want to say?
So we don't have that. I don't personally know.
Right. What does that mean? Have you asked, Brian? I think Wednesday you said you're going to look into that.
So, Hallie, the president doesn't check all of his HIPAA rights at the door just when he becomes president.
And this question, Alison, of course, is relevant because, one, it would give an indication about how long the president might have been contagious before he announced publicly that he had tested positive. And that could be used to do contact tracing and let people know at some of these events in the days leading up to his positive test, let those people know whether they might have had an exposure or be at risk.
Shannon, I'm so glad you referred to that exchange because it was unbelievable watching that live earlier today. What seems like a straightforward and, as you mentioned, important question. Hallie repeated over and over and over again. Couldn't get a yes or no. Couldn't get an explanation about whether they knew, whether they didn't, why they aren't releasing that information. Seems to be a big issue that we just keep talking about this week, that we would like a little more transparency, some more answers from the White House so we can have a better understanding of what position President Trump is to go out on the road, to be perhaps close to voters, to leave the White House. In an interview with Hannity, Trump said he is ready to get back on the trail. Here's a clip.
I think I'm going to try doing a rally on Saturday night if we have enough time to put it together. But we want to do a rally in Florida, probably in Florida on Saturday night.
Shannon, I know you said the White House has been a little bit late in the day to give out information, or at least that's been the pattern so far this week. Do you know yet if there are plans for a rally tomorrow and what kind of safety precautions, if any, the Trump campaign will take?
Well, as we talk at 3 o'clock on Friday, there are no indications there will be a rally tomorrow in Florida. Nothing has been scheduled. Nothing has been announced. Reporters haven't been notified. None of us are traveling to Florida in anticipation for a rally. So I can say that much now. Now, next week is a different question. And the campaign has been indicating, and based on our reporting, that the president could do something on Thursday night, which was supposed to be the town hall debate that the debate commission moved to be virtual. The president said, no, I'm not going to do a virtual debate. The Biden campaign took that to mean this event is off, and they have scheduled their own separate town hall debate. And we are anticipating the president could hold a rally that night. Now, of course, this all has to do with how the course of his infection goes over the next few days. really his own doctor was the one who said he won't really breathe a sigh of relief until this coming Monday. But I know that that is something on the horizon, is possibly a Thursday night rally as counter programming to this town hall event that Biden's going to do, and something to supplement the debate that at one point had been scheduled.
Shannon, let's talk COVID relief for a second. The president reversing course and tweeting today, go big on a COVID relief bill. I mean, that is a pretty big change from the beginning of the week when he wanted to shut down negotiations. Do we have a clearer sense of what he wants now? And are you hearing anything from Republicans about all this flip-flopping?
Right. Yeah, the president's been really all over the map. As you mentioned, he told in a tweet his Treasury Secretary no longer to negotiate with Nancy Pelosi after it seemed like talks were kind of picking up steam. They weren't hours away from a deal, but they were making some progress. Trump called it off. Then he started suggesting that he wanted to do these piecemeal deals, like a bill for the airlines, like a specific piece of legislation to help bail out the airline industry. Pelosi, though, indicated she wasn't interested in that. Republicans on the Hill, that Pelosi has wanted to do one big package that includes a lot of things in there, including money for states. Republicans on the Hill have not been open to a big package, but now Trump is indicating he wants a package, and he said even bigger than the one Democrats are looking for. So all over the place here, Allison.
Shannon, it has been quite a week in Washington. Thank you so much for being with us throughout the entire week, helping us to make sense of it all. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
How can President Trump show up for rallies this weekend without putting other people at risk? Let's bring in NBC News senior medical correspondent Dr. John Torres. Dr. John, we've been talking about this. We still do not know the last time the president tested negative for the coronavirus. We're not sure when he's going to be tested again. What safety concerns does that raise for you if he goes ahead with some sort of in-person rally or event over this weekend?
And Allison, the biggest concern is, can he spread this to others? Is he still contagious? And if you look at what's happened here, especially the timeline and looking at the testing, you're right. We have not heard yet that he had a negative test. And one negative test in and of itself might not mean that he is no longer contagious, depending on what kind of test they do and how they're doing it. But they're talking, Dr. Connolly, his doctor, is actually talking about doing what they call advanced diagnostic testing. Not exactly sure what that means. I think that means PCR testing, which can give you some indication. But again, we haven't heard anything about that. But looking at CDC guidelines and looking at the letter Dr. Connolly put out last night, if you look at it, he says here, Saturday will be day 10 since Thursday's diagnosis. And based on the trajectory of advanced diagnostic testing we're doing, the president should be safe to return to public engagement. So Saturday's day 10. If you look at the CDC requirements, and I'm looking at the CDC page here, they say you can be around others after 10 days since symptoms first appeared. His symptoms first appeared on Thursday. That 10 days is 24-hour periods, not calendar days. And so if you look at 10 days is actually Sunday. And per CDC guidelines, it's after those 10 days, which would be Monday, before they consider him no longer contagious and he can leave isolation. That's assuming he had mild or moderate symptoms. If you remember, though, he also got placed on dexamethasone, which is usually reserved for people with severe symptoms. And he had those 2 oxygen levels that were low, which are also considered severe symptoms. So it's a very confusing picture here. But the bottom line is we want to be sure that he's no longer contagious before he gets out in public and around other people, Allison.
Dr. John, we've been talking about how last night the president was coughing and clearing his throat during an interview on Fox News last night. Is that a concern? Is a cough a sign that he could still be contagious? Or do symptoms like a cough tend to linger beyond the point where you're no longer contagious?
And Allison, there's 2 sides to this coin here. One, yes, it's a concern, at least a little bit of a concern, because coronavirus is a respiratory illness. And so having that cough means that there is some lung involvement. But we already knew that from his low oxygen levels and some of the medicines they put him on. And so, having that cough certainly raises a few concerns about, okay, is he still having problems? But we also know if you've had any kind of illness, the virus usually ends up going away. Let's take the flu, for example. And then the symptoms can linger on for longer periods of time. If you've ever had bronchitis, the bacterial infection or the viral infection, that can go away and you can have bronchitis for weeks to come. Still that coughing fits that you get every now and then. Same thing could be happening here. So again, the picture is very confusing. What would help is getting those x-rays or CAT scans, or at least an understanding of what they show, so we know what's happening in his lungs, because what's happening in his lungs is driving that cough and that kind of breathing issues he might be having, Allison.
Dr. John, we have to stop talking about this, because every time we say coughing and clearing throat, I keep thinking I need to do it. I don't know how you do your job all day long talking about symptoms and not feeling like you have them yourself.
Trust
let me
me, once
ask
I get
you
off,
then, what type of long-term... like crazy, right? Let me ask you this. What type of long-term symptoms or issues do patients with COVID in their 70s, like President Trump, typically experience? What is normal to see in the longer term?
And so he's in his 70s. He actually has a couple risk factors. Being 74, above 65 puts you in a higher risk factor category, but also he's obese, and so that puts him in one as well. And that obesity might be even a bigger issue. But long term, what we're looking at are some respiratory issues, like we're talking about here, that coughing, maybe shortness of breath that can happen, especially with what we call exertion, climbing stairs, carrying heavy things. That can continue on for weeks on end. But one of the bigger ones we're seeing is fatigue. People just talk about this fatigue that kind of comes and goes, but it's an overwhelming fatigue where they just they haven't experienced that before, and they aren't able to do much. But we also know that things like the loss of sense of smell or taste, that can linger for a while. There's a lot of these different things that can happen. Plus, kind of one of the quirky things about coronavirus, and it's a very odd virus that's causing very odd symptoms, is people can be doing great. They can do well for weeks on end, and then all of a sudden they start getting symptoms over again. We're not exactly sure why that's happening, but it seems to be happening with quite a few people, Allison.
Dr. John, let's talk about what we're seeing across the country. Some COVID issues are starting to pop up. New York City shutting down some of its schools this week. Hospitals in Green Bay, Wisconsin, overwhelmed with new patients. Dr. Fauci has said he is just not comfortable with the level of cases in our country right now. How do we best level this off? What can we do? Or is this false spike inevitable? Is this kind of the start of what we have been talking about for months now?
You know, the fall spike is not inevitable if everybody does those things that we know they need to do in order to keep it under control. But human nature being what it is, especially we're 10 months into this pandemic, people are getting tired of doing those things. They just have to remember they need to double down. But what Dr. Fauci talked about a few months ago never came to fruition. And he said at some point we need to see 10,000 or less cases a day in this country before the flu season hits. We never really got below an average of around 40,000 cases. And so the concern is the flu season and the winter months where coronavirus might be worse are going to start piling on each other. The reason it might be worse in the winter is for a variety of things, but mainly because we go indoors, we start having runny noses, we start sneezing, we start coughing, and that's one way this virus, and like the flu virus, spreads. So the best things you can do, number one, get the flu vaccine. And Allison, I'm going to give you a little bit of a test here. What are the 4 W's?
Wash your hands. They're all W's. Oh, I'm going to blow it here. Well, I know all the things to do, but do I have to use a W? Can I just say all the things to watch out for?
Yeah, watch out for.
Wear your mask.
That's fine.
Wash your hands. Maintain social distance. And I'm missing the 4th one. What am I forgetting? It's important. Oh, open windows. I was thinking stay outside. Okay. Windows is done. Windows, wash your hands. What's the W in social distance?
Watch your distance and wear a mask.
Perfect. And wear a mask.
You know
what the issue is here, Dr. John? I'm so used to doing all these things because you've told me so many times. I don't even have to think about it. They're just second nature.
I love the fact they're second nature. They should be second nature for everybody.
I got to just keep working on the W's there, but we know what to do. Thanks so much for reminding us, Dr. Torres. It's always great to be with you.
You bet.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.